Yeah, that was a weird part of the process. Was a lot of times it was just me preparing something and then calling Matteo when I was ready to film it.
We did it to everybody else, so I'm going to be critical on camera to you. I was trying to think of are there any rules that you learned maybe early on in parkour or as we've gone, rules that you're supposed to do when you're doing parkour?
So I know the one that you're alluding to. I'm not going to say that, but
it's the obvious
do you know another one? And this one's really going to get you.
Okay.
Is the straight arm climb up.
Oh yeah, straight arm climb up. Yeah. So anyway, we're talking about rules of technique. When I started parkour, at least, it was very much like a rule, and I think it still really is, but it's a rule land on your toes, lands on the balls of your feet. That's how you move like a cat, right? And that's another good one, which is and this came years later when the better version of climb ups came, the level 3 climb up, if you want to call it that.
I never want to call it that.
I don't want to call it either, but there's a lot of reasons for that too. We can maybe get into that too. But yes, you should try to pull up to straight arms. And I was just trying to think of other rules that people have applied or come up with that have been tropes in our culture, in parkour culture, for how to do things. And so those are the two main ones, but I'm struggling to think of other ones, but I'm sure there are other ones. And it's funny because I was training with somebody who was oh, but Rene told me to do this.
Whoa.
I'm not saying, okay. And they're a person that takes things very literally, where it's oh, this is now the rule I apply to every scenario. And I was just kind of off the cut, I was as a rule, don't follow rules. Mm-hmm. And I think that uniquely applies to parkour in a lot of ways, because we're different than other sports in a lot of ways. Because I don't know, I think of track and field. Typically, you're doing a repetitive motion. For running, for instance, you don't want to deviate from good technique, and good technique looks the same pretty much everywhere. Mm-hmm. The same is true for, I don't know, pole vaulting. There's rules that you follow for good pole vaulting technique because the same scenario happens in every contest. And so you're always training under the same circumstances. But parkour, the interesting thing about it is that it's always a changing environment. We're always applying parkour skills to different environments and different contexts. And, you might do a plyo that's 6 feet, but you might do a plyo that's 10 feet, mm-hmm. And you might be dropping into the plyo, or you might be going up into the plyo. And so it's harder to come up with good rules to follow because we're always changing those rules based on the context. And so in general, that's why I said, as a rule, don't follow rules, because rules actually get in the way of adapting to circumstances.
Yeah, I think I can mostly agree with that. I guess the one thing that I will say is that you're saying that the circumstances are going to, not circumstances, but the structures and the environment, but there is actually it is finite. There is a limited amount of types of structures, I would say, that you can apply a precision jump to, for example. Because there's a limited amount of things. Eventually you'll come to a point in your training where you've not, you can't go as far as saying you've seen it all, yeah. But maybe 99% being seen it all. One of the cool things about this stage in the game too with parkour is that people do tend to try things that haven't been tried before. We talked about this in a previous episode with pole sliding, for example.
Yeah.
Maybe someone had done that some time ago in parkour, but it wasn't really pushed to the level that we're seeing now, or the different ways to do it. So someone will take a structure that, how many times have you seen a pole that you could probably have jumped from height to and slid down, and yet it wasn't a big part of practice or something that someone tried to figure out different ways to do. So with precision jumps, like I've seen people jump to chains and weird stuff, But again, there is probably a limited amount of things that you could do a precision jump to.
Yeah, I guess my point is you're totally right in that there's a finite number of scenarios, but I guess my point is suggesting that it's very hard to distill that information down to a very simple rule.
Yeah.
Right? Like land on the balls of your feet is a very simple rule that we know now is not always true, is not always a good rule to follow. And so I think, and early on, maybe it was good to kind of go through a stage where I thought that was a good rule to follow always. But as you progress, you end up breaking those rules, and whether or not you're aware of it, you might, like, for example, I feel like I didn't really understand how a precision worked until really, like, I don't know, a handful of years ago.
Yeah, same.
So, and it's like, and we've been doing parkour and coaching for, over a decade, or even more than that, right? So I think
you can give yourself a bit more credit than a few years, but I think what you're saying is just so people are listening, like, what, you didn't know how to do it.
It wasn't 2 years ago. It was 6 years ago.
Yeah, well,
8 years ago.
And there may have been technique that you were using previous to that was just suboptimal, I think is what we're saying. Like, you could still stick a precision jump to a variety of structures, just there may have been some suboptimal technique that was being used.
Yeah. And same goes for a lot of other skills too, right? Like there's like things I thought were the case based on the simple rule of thumb I had in my head, that upon review, like an intense review of like video footage, is like, oh, I actually don't do what I'm telling other people to do. And it's like, okay, well, I should reevaluate the communication I'm giving to others, especially as a coach. I should be more careful with the language I use, because if they take it too literally, they will actually have worse outcomes. And that, I think, is the case in a lot of coaching that we experience, because it's less of just like a cultural environment of like, hey, we're all just kind of training and you're helping, and like, oh, you got the skill, you got the thing, you got the challenge, that's cool. Whereas like there's actually like a level of authority that we have as coaches that we're then passing down information, and then these people are trusting us that we're giving them the right information and they're following the rules we're giving them. And so I try to make sure I communicate to people that sometimes there's like things they need to do, but it only applies to certain contexts. And that's why, I don't know, like I feel like a lot of times in parkour coaching, there's a lot of misinformation that happens, and it's not malicious misinformation. It's just, you didn't realize that that's actually not how it's done in all contexts. And there's like a delicate balance you have to play of coming up with rules that people can understand and implement, but that don't interfere with each other or are able to be applied to more than just one scenario. Anyway, it's a topic I think about often because I coach often, and so this came up, and I was telling you about this before we started recording, but we had a student coming and visiting from London who's taking classes from somebody in London, and she's landing plyos, or she's doing plyos by trying to stay on her toes. And it's like, ends up pushing your hips forward and making it so that you can't really get a good jump on your second or third jump, whatever. And it came up because she was like, well, my coach back home says to, always stay on the balls of your feet. And it's like, this is a scenario where landing on the balls of your feet is the right move, in certain contexts, like if you're dropping down from height, or if you're landing on the edge, you want to land on the balls of your feet on the edge. But when you're landing on a flat platform, especially if you're not dropping from height, then you're more likely to actually land on your heels first. You drive through and roll into that position. And I wonder if the rules that we have as a culture in parkour are actually helping newer generations, or do we end up with like a survival of the fittest scenario where the people who end up getting it succeed in spite of the rules, not because of the rules?
Yeah, as you're describing this, it's making me think of rails specifically, because I think this is where someone would try to play like the devil's advocate. And rail plyos, in fact, yes, you are aiming to be on the ball of your foot if you're doing a rail plyo. We can edge a bit more into the arch of the foot. If you're jumping off the arch of the foot, you're probably going to feel like you don't get as much power off of something specifically rail because your ankle doesn't get as much range of motion to jump. But, and I actually have recently, I have an Instagram clip of doing some rail plyos, and I haven't checked this, but I'd be happy to to zoom in and go in slow motion. But what we would probably see is that actually my heel comes down with the contact on every rail. So if you were to then take the rail and expand the landing surface, and now it's a wall, my heel may actually come in contact with the wall on each one. So even when we think of stuff like rails, which as I said is usually where someone goes with trying to play devil's advocate on this, like, well, how are you going to land on your heels or whatever here? Well, your heel's floating in the air, but it does drop down. And this is something where if you were to read up or educate yourself on plyometrics, and there's also, I'll mention McKinn's Watson posts a lot of content on Instagram for free about plyometrics and foot position. Derek Hansen also for sprinting, and it's all kind of the same because even in those cultures, like in sports training, they talk a lot about being on the ball of the foot, particularly in sprinting. There's an argument for like, oh, I should be on the balls of my feet. And then they'll slow down a clip of Usain Bolt and watch like, yes, the ball of foot does make contact first, but then the whole foot comes down. Not only that, as he's about to make contact, it's not with a pointed foot, which is what gets us into the problem that you may have been having with this this client, is that she may be jumping in a way where she's thinking she has to point her toes in the air to specifically land on the ball of the foot, which we don't want to do. Sometimes
we do, though. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
If we're dropping down, like straight down from height, we want to absorb the impact on the balls of our feet, which is a good rule of thumb. Like, yeah, if you're taking...
I actually don't... That's actually something where if someone were to debate me or ask me about, I wouldn't be totally clear on. Even that, I'm actually thinking of a drop that I was doing the other day because I was coming out of a dive Kong and trying to gallop and noticed that on the first two, like my heels drop. And as soon as that happens, when you're intending to do a gallop or a roll, like get to your hands, you'll find that it kind of feels useless. Like, oh, I put my hands down and it kind of kept the momentum going, but it didn't take the impact off my legs. So in fact, I needed to be leaning more forward or diving more forward to get onto my hands. But I have no sense of what my foot position was, like at the millisecond before it made contact with the ground. Right. I only have the sensation of knowing that my heel mostly stayed off of the ground. It may have dropped slightly on impact, and then I went to my hands. But I'm not confident to say that I was pointing my toes in the air. Right. I actually don't know.
Yeah.
I just know that what I wanted to achieve was achieved. But what got me to achieve it was getting more onto my hands on the landing, not thinking about pointing my toes in the air.
Yeah, I think Kongs in general, a little bit different of a beast, except in some circumstances.
This is the exit.
Yeah, I know. But there's a lot of forward momentum with that. So let's just say that you're dropping down from 6 feet straight down to the ground and you're trying to absorb the impact, you're likely to impact like more toe heavy first. Alternatively, if you're doing a broad jump for as much distance as possible, you're likely to do the opposite, which is like roll from your heel to your toe.
Yeah.
And so I think in those two very distinctly different scenarios, there's probably an obvious movement solution for a straight drop down, which is toe heavy landing, versus a very forward, like horizontal force landing, which is going to be more of like a heel to toe landing. But it gets a lot trickier when you play around with like, oh, well, what if it's a drop broad jump? Then it's becoming less clear how you're actually going to take that impact.
Yeah, because you're not directly trying to attack the ground in some scenarios. For some people, there's a limit to how much of a drop they can take and still attack the ground. Again, if you're doing flat plyos, like just across flat ground or flat walls that are the same height, you'd be wanting to actually try to pull your toes back in the air, still potentially making contact with either a flat foot or a ball of foot first. But if you're taking a big drop into one, you actually might need to absorb it more and then change the angle of your foot. But a lot of this stuff, I think when you're doing it, it almost seems wrong to be thinking about.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when you're describing the Kong situation where you were coming out of it and landing, it's like, at the end of the day, it feels like in that scenario, like, who cares what your foot is actually doing? Did you have the outcome that you desired? And in that case, it's like, okay. But I feel like when we're hyper focused on landings, because we are in parkour, we do a lot of precision landings. It's such a heavily practiced element of our sport, or just drop landings in general. We should have an understanding of how, like, what our foot position is doing. And when you, especially as a coach, if you can see somebody doing something that looks wrong, you should be able to understand why it looks wrong and how to fix it, which is always the hardest part of coaching is the error detection and then providing an intervention to correct the error. And then the other part of it is like that person that needs to take your intervention and be able to apply it, which is, there's things that can be lost in communication. Some people learn very differently than others. So that's the art of coaching, which is really difficult. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's not a topic that people, maybe people think about this. I don't know, but I feel like it's not talked about. And I mean, even, I'll call them out, but Hub has signs on their walls that say land on your toes. And it's like, is that the right thing to be telling people? Because does that encourage the wrong type of movement to be done in these scenarios?
Yeah, for some.
I think for some people,
as you said, like survival of the fittest.
Yeah. Because it's like, I learned parkour and it was like, stay on the balls of your feet. Like everything is done on the balls of your feet. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. And I took that to heart a little bit initially, but through practice and experience, without even knowing, I realized that I don't always land on the balls of my feet. And so I learned that through experience, not through conscious effort of, I'm going to now stop landing on the balls of my feet in these specific scenarios. Whereas others, maybe they continue doing the habit of land on the balls of your feet in all scenarios. And so I just wonder, are we setting people up for failure when we give them these rules to follow?
Maybe.
And the other thing too, which is funny, because I was coaching somebody, this is adult client years ago, and I was explaining to them like, oh, like catch the edge like just behind the ball of the foot. That way the whole ball of the foot is on the edge or like over the edge. And she was like, oh, I think I've been always hitting the front of the ball of the foot.
Which makes it so that they're more on their toes.
They're more on their toes. And of course that
toesy landing
puts you at more risk of things like ankle thingies or just slip outs or various other potentially bad things to happen. And it was really interesting for me to hear that, because it was like, oh, the ball of the foot is bigger than the edge of a surface. You might interpret it wrong, or like you might have a student or like a client or somebody who you're teaching or just showing parkour, you might encourage them to do the wrong thing just by saying the ball of the foot. Oh, front of the ball of the foot, I get it.
Yeah, I wonder because certainly if I have beginners, and this is something that gets talked about just as like a coaching generalization, so like outside of parkour, is like beginners at something, they will have a tougher time wrapping their heads around precise body parts. So if I tell you, like you're doing, just pick a sport, but we'll stick with parkour. If I tell you to do something with your foot in the air as you jump, as a beginner, you can watch it. You can test this if you coach, or if you've coached someone or are coaching someone and they're new. You can, if you want to mess with them, you can test it out by getting them to try to do something with very, very specific. If you're really good, if I tell you to do something with your foot, I can probably actually get the result that I'm looking for if I make that micro correction. And so beginners do better with just the bigger picture idea, almost like external cues sometimes is what's working better. And so I think you're right that if people are entering into parkour and they have an instructor who is able to perform all the things that they're trying to coach, but then they're beginning with this like land on the ball of your foot, or it can be interpreted in so many ways that are not helpful. And we I'll say secretly pick on some of the pros sometimes. So people that are competing in competitions, skill competitions, and we'll review footage and be like, they don't know how to stick a jump. Like it's happening.
They're able to.
It's happening sometimes, but it's sometimes very clear watching through the attempts that they actually don't know the ideal technique to get it done. And so it's often taking them more attempts, or they're getting away with it by some other means.
Yeah.
And we did like a YouTube video talking about landing on tops of things. And it's like, yeah, you can totally like spike your jump and try to like drop straight down. That will be a stick, but it doesn't work with all the variety of structures and sizes of jumps that you could do.
Super hard to do, because that means you have to jump with the exact right amount of power. Whereas if you really understand how to contact an edge, you can have better stopping ability. So you can put a little bit more power than you need to, but still be able to stop and stick the landing.
Yeah. I think last thing I want to say on this is I actually had a progression with rail precisions. So you might recall, I'm going to say 2012, so just over 10 years ago, if you show me like a tiny rail pre, I could stick it, but anything that was like challenging for me, I could not stick rail pre's. I had no problem jumping to rails, but I would often overshoot. And it's the type of landing where when you're trying to teach someone what counts, it's like, oh, it doesn't count because like technically I landed, and then there was I was fighting for it, but clearly had gone over. And that may have been at the time a result of trying to land on the balls of my feet. Mm-hmm. What happened from there is when I really started to focus on it, I could only stick a rail pre if I bottomed out. So I think the same habit was still occurring at that time, because again, and we'll see this with some of the pros or some of the people that are revered as being quite good but don't really know how to land a jump, is they'll only land something like a rail pre if they completely bottom out in a squat. And I didn't like that, because that meant that I had to kill my jump to a certain degree in order to achieve the landing, or I could stick something if it was at end range, because then I don't have a choice but to bottom out. Yeah. So it was like this sort of like medium difficulty range where I would have so much inconsistency until I could decrease my jump enough or change my trajectory enough so that I would just bottom out, because that's how I would receive the jump. And then I don't know what time it happened, but eventually I started to learn how to actually land for what I feel is quite good now, which is I can land in a much higher squat position, which is very useful because now I have options. When you're able to do that, you're more likely to stick more landings because you can have a variety of squat heights that you land in. But that all comes from I had to get comfortable with I think the last piece being doing bounce backs on rails.
Yeah.
So now we encourage people to develop that as an ability as soon as possible, because if you can bounce back something, you're learning how to stop, and you're learning how to stop with a variety of different like air trajectories.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many good things about bounce backs. Helps you with committing.
Mm-hmm.
If you know what the outcome is if you come up short, which is a bounce back, then or you have the tools to like deal with that. I think so much easier to commit to a jump.
I think you and I could do a whole weekly podcast on like bounce back stories.
Yeah.
Tales of bounce backs.
Tales of the BB. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, that's what I had to say about like, because this kind of came up because I was thinking about the rule that we keep teaching, we as a culture keep teaching newer generations, and it's been around since I started, at least, if not before then. So and it's just like, yeah, when are we gonna get out of these like rules of thumbs that are doing, in my opinion, more damage than good?
I don't think ever, because as I mentioned before, like with plyometrics and track and field coaching, there's still disagreement, and then you have people putting up like having to resort to essentially like video evidence of what's actually like slow-mo video evidence of what's actually happening to say, hey, this is a bad cue, stop telling people to do this because this is what's actually happening. But they're still not winning, like the bad cueing. And I think you'll probably see the same thing in like weightlifting and all that too. So we're probably stuck with it, but it's okay. We can keep doing podcasts where we talk for a half an hour about how your feet should be landing. Leave a comment if you listen to this entire segment.
Should we talk about climb ups? Yeah.
I think we can go another another direction.
That's fine.
Here. We finally caught up on all of our 2023 video watching, and
it was mostly me. I finally caught up.
Well, I also say that with a grain of salt, I guess, because I'm sure there's videos that have yet to be seen. Last week we did some of our favorites, but there are a number of unmentioned videos, and so we have caught up. I think we're on the same page now.
Yep.
Which one do you want to start with?
Well, yeah, okay. So we want to do some like what's it called when honorable mentions. Mm-hmm. Do some honorable mentions, because these videos weren't really brought up at all in the conversation of best videos. At least for us, they also weren't really mentioned in the Sports Store Awards as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it'd be useful to, or we thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about them. So we'll start with the first one that Egon, shout out Egon, gave us a comment asking us about Crooked Man, or mentioning, like, I don't know why Crooked Man hasn't been in this conversation. Crooked Man by Gio Bartolucci from Italy. And, you know, excellent athlete, amazing athlete. Do you want to talk about the video itself?
Yeah, I've watched it 2.5 times now.
Okay.
And also the About Crooked Man. And I felt kind of bad because I went in really anticipating this project. I got to meet Gio for the first time, have you met him before we were in Belgium?
No, that was my first time.
Okay, so both of us met him for the first time around this time last year. And that's actually apparently when he had started the project. And he had mentioned that to me because I witnessed him do one of the bigger challenges that were in the project. So I was really looking forward to it. And for me, it fell flat on the amount of, I guess, the amount of lines or the amount of challenges that are in it. And I'm sure it was intentional, but it's almost like the opposite of what I was critical about with Nate Weston's project. Whereas like Nate's project may have made a bigger impact for me if there were more things in it, like more clips.
I actually, sorry to jump in here, but I kind of disagree with when it comes to Nate's project, because I thought it was a great number of things in it. It was just, there was too much non-clips, like too much B-roll. And it felt like it just lengthened the project that could have been shorter and tighter and more like impactful.
Yeah. Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah.
And then as far as Crooked Man goes, I feel the same thing about it, but exactly what you said, the opposite direction.
And it's so tough because I think like I'm a huge fan of the athletes we're mentioning. And I think it's just tough because when you're really good at parkour, you shouldn't be expected to be really good at making videos. They're two completely different skill sets, which is also tough to hear because I'm sure if you're someone like Gio or Nate, and I actually don't know who edited Nate's video, maybe he did. I know Gio edited his video. You might be hearing this sort of criticism, and it's tough because you put work into something that you love, and it's maybe not being received the way you wanted it to be. Having said all that, there are so many incredible things in Gio's video that are very unique to him and very close to being things that only he would do. And so we crowned Chris Roth's video Maven as video of the year for much of the same reason, as there's such a uniqueness to his style, but it was also the construction of the video that made that video of the year. But I wonder if you were to put the same, I guess, filmmaking effort into Gio's Crooked Man, and if you were a little bit more critical of which lines to include, because there are some stuff that's just obviously like a lot more chill, a lot closer to the ground, a lot less risk, and not everything's a banger, which is okay. You can have some stuff in there that's not a banger, but there was almost like too much in comparison. And then I think you mentioned this when we were watching, that there wasn't enough for the things that are bangers. There wasn't the right amount of build up to them. So I actually, but it makes me wonder that if you were to re-edit Gio's video, if that would become video of the year. So I'm actually curious what your thoughts are on that.
I don't know, hard to be Maven, but maybe it's hard to like imagine a hypothetical re-edit of a video. But I guess I'm of the same mind as you here when it comes to Crooked Man. It felt like it watched like a Instagram compilation. Unfortunately, it didn't come across as like this is a big video project with a bunch of saved clips. But having said that, a lot of the incredible clips in there are truly incredible. Like some really, really hench stuff was in it. But I guess, like as I was watching it, I think I said this to you, was it feels like 1 out of every 6 clips are a project clip. Mm-hmm. Whereas a lot of it was like, some chill lines, some fun looking stuff, some stuff that's probably hard but doesn't read as super hard. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of it was, and it definitely picks up in the second half. But the rest, that half is really just a little bit more banger, a little bit more substance to it. But I mean, there's some big things that happen that it doesn't feel like they were built up at all. And so looking at all the clips individually, Crooked Man is an awesome video. If we're taking like the best of Crooked Man, it's an incredible video. There's so many good things. But the construction of it makes you, at least it makes me feel like I like some of the music choices and the B-roll elements and some of the way it was like some of the clips were filmed, you know, and this is something that you already brought up, but you can't really fault people for not being professionals when it comes to filmmaking, because somebody who's good at parkour is not necessarily going to be really good at editing or filming a video, or asking other people to film in a particular way and to have the perfect vision for it. And so this is why I think Maven was such a good video, was because it, you know, all Chris had to do was show up and do the thing that he was good at. And then I think was Noah and Connor and Ethan, maybe. They filmed the project, and they have a unique eye for, you know, selecting shots and then putting it together. And they chose, in my opinion, the right music choices in all this. And they kind of they crafted it and put together in such a way that made me really, really like, I bought into it almost from the start. Whereas Crooked Man, to me, didn't have that same impact with like in terms of drawing me in with emotion, drawing me into like peaking at the right moments and really showing what he's best at. And so that's where I felt like it was lacking. But yeah, like take all the raw clips that were the best in that video. It has the potential to be video of the year for sure.
Can I'm going to try to play a bit of devil's advocate here, because I think this is something that kind of needs to be understood. And maybe it's sometimes where, especially I think the two of us get too harsh. And part of the reason is because we've just seen so many parkour videos over the years that it's like, if you're trying to hold, like you and I, if you're trying to hold our attention, it's pretty tough. But I guess the devil's advocate argument I'm thinking of making is should it, if we're talking about video of the year, meaning the video that an athlete puts out that has some of the craziest stuff in it, should the edit matter?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, because what I'm about to say, I think the same thing was around like Caveman 5. So I'm going to get you to defend that argument, basically.
Okay.
Because I think the same thing around like Caveman 5, where, and I seem to recall Benj Cave mentioning this, that it's about the movement. They weren't trying to edit it more. They weren't trying to do more with the camera work. They wanted it to be just about the movement. And so if I'm making that argument that it should just be about the movement, we shouldn't necessarily be looking at video of the year. Like, I should be able to watch Gio's video and be like, oh yeah, there's so many things in here that are only things that Gio could do or would do, and it's incredible, and we should be just removing all of the other stuff, and I should just be watching it like I'm watching any other sport, because sports have like lulls in them, right? You can be watching like an MMA match and it's fight and throughout that fight there's a bunch of lulls and boring stuff, and this guy won though, and he gets the belt, right? Or he's the champion, he's the winner of the fight, even though it was like boring to consume. So what's wrong with that argument that it should just be about what feats were performed in the video to be video of the year?
Oh, there's so much wrong with it. Okay, so the way it's filmed matters. I don't care which way you slice it. The way it's filmed matters, because if I've never been to a spot and somebody does a gnarly gap and you film it in a way that makes the gap look small, I'm not going to know that it's a gnarly gap.
Okay, so filming matters, and I think most people could get on board with that. But now when it comes to the edit, and as we said, the build up, because I know there are some athletes out there that are like really against the idea of like, I guess, indulging more, because it can feel indulgent if you're if you're putting together a project where it's like showing the build up, showing all the process, using maybe like trying to create drama around the edit, because that's honestly how it probably felt. But it does start to, it can, there's a fine line where it can get too indulgent. And I think that a lot of athletes are afraid of that.
And they just want to let the movement speak for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's fine, but you're not going to make the best film. That's the point, is like, it's, if you're making something that people really want to watch, it can't just be about the movement, because I can pull out Instagram and scroll through my feed and watch incredible things all day. It's the reality. I literally just like, oh, incredible, 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 incredible. It's not about the incredibleness of the movement. It's about how you take all those incredible things and you put it together into a film that I actually want to watch. Sit down, spend 8 minutes of my time watching and maybe rewatching. Like there's some videos that I've watched multiple times now, and it's because of the way the video makes me feel. It draws me in. It tells a little bit of a story. Maybe it shows some attempts that were that makes me understand how hard that skill was to do in that scenario. If it's just like banger, 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 you didn't try enough. You didn't have the skill of editing enough to get me to really care or like it that much. So it definitely matters the way that it's edited, the way that it's filmed, the way it's put together, but I agree. It's a fine line. It can end up becoming too indulgent, and then it can be the opposite, where it's just like you just slapped a bunch of clips onto a timeline, and so which one's better? I don't know. Probably depends on the scenario, but the ideal thing is the skill coming together and putting it right in the middle, where it's like the perfect amount of showing off the movement and the perfect amount of maybe a little bit of storytelling, a little bit of B-roll, and kind of selling the movements to me. Because at the end of the day, it's the video, and you can make the argument, all right, I'm making this video for me. But if you're upset that your video doesn't get as much views or recognition, then it's not for you. You're making it for the audience. And if the audience likes a different video better because of the way it was filmed and edited, then that video should be the video of the year, or in general be considered a better video.
I think I can...
But I do think you need both. Like, you need to have really high level of skill and ability in parkour, and it needs to be put together well.
Yeah. And I hope that makes sense, because I'm definitely in agreement there. And I think that's, if people ever get confused with our takes on things when we're talking about videos, we're talking about, video of the year contenders or videos that you have to watch. And I would have a tough time like recommending something like Gio's video to someone that isn't really like deep into parkour.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you want, and I think I'm sure that people that are deep into parkour have seen it and appreciate it. And if that's all you want, then great, you achieved what you set out to achieve. But if you want it to touch more people and make an impact and inspire, then more needs to be done. The tricky thing, and the thing that I really feel for parkour athletes on, is that that's a tall order. We are in a stage where it's easier to make consumable content. It's never been easier. It's never been easier to make a video.
Yeah.
You have AI tools, you have better cameras, you have stabilization. So many things make it easier to make a video right now, but still not everyone is going to have the right eye, be critical enough of what's going to go into it to cut things out. I think that's probably the hardest part, is leaving things on the cutting board. And I think also the last thing I wanted to touch on with Gio's video particularly is that at the start of the video, he has like a skateboard clip
Yeah.
And a lot of his inspiration for video making comes from skateboarding. The biggest difference there is that if a pro skater puts out a clip or puts out a video part, first of all, they're a pro skater, and they're called a pro skater for a reason, because they were probably sponsored to make that video. And someone paid to get filmmakers out to get other people holding cameras. Like, you can watch a skate video, and I don't watch too many of them, but you can watch a skate video and see 3 angles of the exact same make. Yeah. Right?
And it takes a lot more tries usually to get a make in skateboarding.
But the skater didn't have to redo anything. They didn't have to get extra B-roll after the fact, because they probably had 3 cameras on them to just make sure everything was captured the way it needed to be.
Yeah.
And we're stuck right now in a state of parkour where there are not the same, there's not the same money being pumped into parkour. Yeah. Not even close. That's being pumped into something like skating or climbing. And you can watch a lot of documentaries from these other like action sports, we'll say, and the pro that's being featured in like a documentary, you never hear them talking about like, oh, I was sitting down and editing my project. It's just they go out and do their job, and then someone does that part for them.
Yeah.
And I think some teams in the past in parkour were spoiled. Like, I can think of Modus had Giles, right?
Yeah.
So like the reason that, one of the videos that stands out to me as like the last real banger that I ever saw was Resurgence.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? Because Giles, right? And then you had Storm Volume 1, which I think had 2, I can't remember the names, but I think had like 2 filmmakers putting that together. And so we've actually been spoiled in the past by some of these really well put together projects. And there's a few people out there right now that have the skills.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to talk about the next video, which is Takeover, which was filmed and edited by Geert. Struggle saying his name.
That's I'm sure that's close enough.
Geert, and he's actually, and his brother, Tom Lachey guy, right? That's, they have, great film equipment, and they really know they have a good eye for filming parkour. And it always looks good, looks fresh the way they film it. And so Takeover was this video, if you haven't seen it, is a video that's filmed entirely in the Hal 5 parkour gym in Belgium. And it's 12 pro female athletes who come and film like an action video in their space. And this is one of those scenarios where it's like, wow, like they actually had all they had to do was show up. All the women had to do was show up and do their job as parkour athletes. They don't have to sit down and edit it and like review footage after the fact. That was Geert and Tom's job. So
they probably had some input, or probably got to see drafts or something.
Yeah, sure. But the bulk of the work has to, falls onto the filmmakers that were ultimately behind the editing and the filming of the project. And so, not everybody in parkour has the luxury of having somebody like willing to film and edit a video who's a professional, or at least like a hobbyist that is into making parkour films or parkour videos. And so I know you wanted to talk about this video because for you it was on your list of video of the year.
Yeah, I would and if it just rewatched again, I would still put it in top 5 because of the movement quality, the action, like the level of the action is high, and then also the construction or the edit of the film is high as well.
Yeah, and I love the way it was filmed. I think Hal 5 actually has a cool aesthetic as well. So I like seeing
That's one of the best aesthetics.
Yeah. And also like there was some nice, good moments in there where it was like there was like choreographed lines where it wasn't only on each individual athlete, but there was like some times when they were, multiple athletes were doing some part of the line. So that was cool. And it just looked good. Just like the way it was filmed, it just looked really good. It wasn't like the perfect video. I feel like there was some points of like dead audio where there was no music and it was just the raw sound, and that can be good sometimes, but it felt like it was just like a little bit too much for me. It felt just a little bit awkward at times, but when it was used right, it was used right. There was some really cool moments there. Makes it feel like raw in the moment, and then the music cuts in at the right time, and so on. But yeah, overall I thought that video was really great, and But again, it comes down to, it wasn't just a parkour person sitting behind the camera and behind the computer, like just putting it together in between sessions. Mm-hmm. It's, and make no mistake, Garrett and Tom are both parkour athletes, and they're very good parkour athletes. So they actually have a good eye for parkour as well, but they're also into video production. So yeah,
it's just an example of again having money behind a project, because they had to get all the athletes there. I don't know if Garrett or Tom get any sort of compensation for work, or if they bill Hal 5 or however that situation works. I don't know, but
there was clearly a budget behind it.
Yeah, either way, there was money spent. And the other, and it's clear. It's just clear. Okay, yeah, you got athletes together in a space and had 2 cameras running and a main editor for it. And the cameras and the edit were not done by the athletes featured. Those were 2 separate separate things. The other thing I'd absolutely love about it is I will say that if you were trying to get girls, women into parkour, that's got to be like one of the best examples out there right now. And in part because of the watchability. Like, we just gave a lot of praise to Lola Roy last podcast for like her compilation of 2023. But I think this would do more if you had someone that you wanted to sit down and be like, oh yeah, let's, because people ask, like, sometimes still, like, do girls do this?
Yeah.
And so if
go
you
watch Takeover.
Yeah. And then I have a little bit of I hadn't seen much from Lin Young in a while, and it was that had an impact on me, seeing some of her movement in that piece as well.
Yeah. It was cool. It's also like a nice diversity of ladies as well, right? Like kind of some younger athletes and some older athletes. Mm-hmm. Relatively, we're not that old, but yeah, it's cool to see that. And there's it's just a good diversity of movement too. Was there a third video we were going to talk about?
We do have a third one, and I don't know how much we want to go into it, but we have a theme here, kind of video production and going into things. This video is behind a paywall, and it's a video that personally I was really looking forward to, and that I'm going to say definitely affected my viewing of it, because I was very hyped for this one. Liz Boom by Team Fat, featuring Lilu Wuo, Lola Roy, Dominic Fichtenbauer, and Sibe. Oh, how do you say his last name?
Spricker?
Oh, and Pedro Salgado.
Yeah.
And just listing,
and also the Team Fat.
And Team Fat. And so just listing that out and then now in my head I'm going through the individual feats in the film, and I'm like, oh, it's really great. I thought it was okay. I'm gonna try to be nice here.
Be nice.
It was a tough watch. It was a tough watch to get through. A lot of it because of the I'm gonna say attempts at storytelling that just were not edited well. There's a lot of interview piece, and a simple fix that we talked about as we were watching it. Like we were talking as we were watching because we were just getting out of it, right? There was a lot of interview, and then it would cut back to action or the scene that they're talking about. Those things needed to be layered on top of each other, and I think that's one correction that I'll say. And I don't know if Orlando or any of Team Fat or anyone involved is ever going to watch or see this, but that's just one thing I will say about the project that would be a simple adjustment is next time, or if you choose to re-edit this, layer those things on top of each other. So if someone's talking, it can't just be them talking. Cut away and layer the voice over the action that's being talked about. It almost seemed like they wanted to make the video longer, and that was a mistake. It probably should have been about half as long.
Yeah, it fell flat for me. I like it. There were some cool moments in it, and there was some big stuff, and like, you know, no doubt about Team Fat are like incredible athletes, and then of course the all-star cast that you just listed there, also incredible. But it felt like there wasn't really a good cohesive story, and the storytelling that was there was like a few big moments that happened where they actually had a story for it, and it was just cutting away to person talking instead of just like the audio of the person talking and telling the story over the video that is helping to communicate the same story. So yeah, I don't know. It felt kind of flat for me in that way. It was definitely not as I think I said this to you when we watched it, but I'd rather watch the vlogs. Like the vlogs do a better job of storytelling than Lisbon did. The other thing too, which I know I'm sure there's limitations around it, but like why do we not get any like talking or storytelling from any of the guest athletes? And I'm sure that's because like, I don't know, they probably had a short time to film with everybody together, and then they went back and they're like, okay, now we need to do some interviews.
It seemed like the interviews came after.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, there, like I said, there's really cool moments in it overall, but I would not sit down to watch it again.
Yeah, neither would I. There's like a re-edit that exists in my head.
Oh yeah,
that I would love to see. But I think they would also require like more footage. But again, we go back to this theme of like, it seemed like Orlando was the main like driving force behind this project in terms of like the behind the camera and behind the edit. Young guy, and his main skill set is doing parkour.
Yeah.
He's also featured doing some of the arguably the toughest things in the whole piece. And yeah, I think it's just I look forward to seeing him like develop that skill set more.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say if he wants to, you know, if that's something that Team Fat is trying to do. We talk about Store all the time. Store has like several, I will say, like filmmakers on the like filmmakers / athletes on the team, right? And I think Team Fat definitely looks up to them and are trying to like follow in their footsteps a little bit there. So I expect that he is going to improve, and hopefully I'm not the only one we're not the only ones giving critical feedback here.
Yeah, I guess one thing I want to say is like the theme here that we're talking about is like, oh, like parkour athletes shouldn't film their own and edit their own projects, but that's not actually, I feel like, what we're necessarily saying. It's like it's just, that's what's, being good at filming and editing is part of the skill set that you need to put out good videos. And if you don't have that skill set, you need to outsource it. And if you don't want to outsource it, then you're going to have to go through some quote unquote failures, right? So I guess I don't think this conversation should really be like discouraging people to continue making videos, because they definitely should, but they should try to use these as learning experiences towards building up to doing a better project in the future.
Yeah, again, it's never been easier. And I actually, last point I'd like to actually make about when it comes to making your own film or video or whatever you want to call it, or documentary, is the skill that's actually missing is storytelling. I'll say more so than how to film it. Okay, this is how to make it look big. Cool, done. This is how not to cut off someone's head when you're filming. Cool, we got that figured out. And the things that were done were amazing. It's actually the storytelling, and that's the storytelling sometimes from start to finish of a video, or sometimes it's the storytelling of like a single challenge and what went into it. And storytelling could be 3 clips. It could just be like, here's someone looking at something, here's someone failing it, and then here's someone getting it. Sometimes it doesn't always need to be like really indulgent either.
Yeah. What I was going to say, you already kind of alluded to it, but what I was going to say is like storytelling doesn't necessarily mean you're sitting in front of the camera and telling the story. Sometimes it's just like putting together clips in an order with a logical sequence of, this is why this was hard and this is me overcoming it. For example, there's other ways to tell stories, but that's what ropes people in. People love stories. Like, that's why vlogs are so important in parkour, is because people love watching the story of why parkour is interesting and cool. It's not just about doing the cool jumps. It's about going through the process of doing the cool jumps, and learning about that story is insightful. So, and it teaches you more about parkour, more about the people who are doing it. And that's ultimately more exciting and awesome to watch.
Yeah.
I do want to say, on the topic of videos, your video came out, Resilient, and it was last week? This is a little over a week ago. Resilient dropped, and you hired an editor.
And video
and
maker,
videographer,
who, by the way, likes to call himself a storyteller.
Oh, really? Yeah, you told me this. Okay, so Mateo Welsh, Welsh or Walsh? Welsh. Mateo Welsh doesn't do parkour. His job title is storyteller, but he holds a camera and he edits. And so I guess I just want to ask you first, is like, how do you feel about having it done now? Is there like a weight lifted off your chest? Is there like dread about like, what do I do now? What do I do next?
Okay, so 2 questions.
Yeah, sorry.
First one, it feels really good to have it out there and get as much of a positive response as I did. Sitting here sometimes week after week and critiquing other projects and then putting out one is a lot of pressure. But I think because of that pressure, we had to make sure it was good. That's part of that is what drove me to do, to not finish it early, to go back and complete what I had on the list for the project, which is part of it if you watch it. I also was anticipating a lot of hate, which maybe I think in parkour, I think people hate in silence. I don't think they
hate behind closed doors.
Yeah, I don't think they hate in comments in public. So I'm sure it's out there because, I do feel like in some ways it can come off as like an indulgent piece, or like I was very aware of that, and I shared in a lot of the editing decisions. And there was some of it where, like, particularly if you've seen it, the end sequence is long. There's a longer end sequence about like one line. And when Mateo first showed me like the draft of it, I didn't believe that it was going to come together. and then he worked on it a bit more, he chipped on it a bit more, and it started to come together. And I said, okay, this is good, right? But initially, I was really against how much time, just basically how much time, like forget how many clips or whatever, just how much time was in that last sequence. But it was what happened.
Yeah.
It was actually a
You
quick,
said like over 200 attempts?
Yeah,
That's wild.
So
why didn't you just give up?
I wanted to put out a good video. I wanted to, it was okay. So then you asked me like, what now? Funny enough, like I still have like a list.
Well, okay, yeah. I did kind of ask you what now, but I had this experience, not to talk about myself, but I had this experience with Ascension 2 when I did the last thing I needed to do, the parking garage ascent. I felt super relieved, and at the same time, I felt like I don't know what to do anymore in parkour. I don't feel like I have anything else to do now because I just did the thing that's been haunting me for so long. So it felt like, I don't know, like, is this it? Am I done now? Like, am I done with parkour? Did I just beat the level, or beat the game? But I guess it sounds like you didn't have that experience. It sounds like you're like, cool, I'm like back on the grind, gonna put together this list and get them done.
Yeah, like I have other jumps, and because I was able to come back and overcome some fears to do the last like 2 lines of that project, and everything in the project was on a certain theme, and so there's just certain things I've been putting off, or like jumps or challenges that are scary for me that definitely wouldn't have fit the theme, but are that I want to do. And I think part of it is also just that I think about public perception. I think about what people think of me as someone in parkour, and whether you think that's a good or a bad attitude to have is, I guess up to you, the viewer. But I do care. But I think it's that care that made me make sure that I put out something that I could stand behind, and probably part of what still keeps me going. Like, I don't know, people find motivation in different things, and that's, I guess, some of my motivation comes from like that comes from a little bit from like what other people might think of me, and I think that's something that gets talked about like negatively all the time. It's like, don't care about what other people think. I can say that I care about what other people think, and that makes me put more time into things sometimes.
Yeah, for better or worse. Like, I think your project came out even better than I expected. No offense. It was just like, but it wasn't because I had like super low expectations, but it was just that I didn't know what to expect about it, because I know Mateo was filming and editing it. I had only seen a couple things that you had done, and it was in person. I never really saw anything on film.
Yeah, that was a weird part of the process. Was a lot of times it was just me preparing something and then calling Mateo when I was ready to film it.
Right.
And when I say like it took 6 years, it's because Mateo wasn't part of like year 1.
Right.
Or year 1.5. There was like a point where I had started filming with someone, and then I had to, they basically weren't reliable anymore. And so I had to like take a break to find someone else to get on board with me. And yeah, a lot of the challenges just were, I had to overcome stuff with myself to do. It's like,
oh yeah.
And it wasn't, sometimes I wanted to like break them before actually going and filming them. So I would like break whatever the crux of the line was. And that's why it took so long. In this past year, I've been saving some clips that I'll probably be putting out in March for my like 20th year. There's a couple of, I'd like to get a couple more if the weather gets better before then. But a lot of them were like the things that didn't take as much effort, you know, like things that I could do on the day that were like, oh yeah, that was cool, and I'm like happy I did it, and it was a good representation of what I'm capable of, but they weren't on the level of like, I'm gonna need to go back to this spot so many times to get over whatever I need to get over.
Interesting. Yeah. I think we did it to everybody else, so I'm going to be critical on camera to you. To your face, actually, which is something we rarely get to do.
These are hard conversations to have.
Okay, so the intro, you're talking. I think Dylan mentions this to you, where it was like, oh no, is this going to be the video? And then it cuts in. It's like, okay, good. It's not. It's going to be mostly an action edit. That's good. That's a relief. Mm-hmm. I feel like the PC cat, there wasn't enough buildup around this being a huge deal, because that was. I know the Ironworks line was a huge deal, but you even said yourself when you premiered it to like the locals here, that the PC cat was potentially even more of a mental,
it was in my head more
challenge. And I feel like it didn't quite, I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it didn't quite come off as like, yo, this is actually a huge deal that you sent it, because also, I mean, so on that same note, it's hard to understand what the timeline is of your injury. Because that happened after coming back from injury, which is, this is a cat leap you've looked at for a decade that you finally willed yourself to be able to commit to. And it felt like there could have just been a tiny bit more storytelling around like, this is a huge deal. And I'm sure it would be hard to do, because it's like, what are the attempts like? You standing there?
So it is, yeah.
I don't have a perfect solution for how it would have come together, but after watching it, I was like, you know what? This is one of the most impactful moments of the whole video that didn't come across as impactful as I feel like it should have. But that's also because that's coming from me behind the scenes knowing about it all.
Yeah, I also I don't particularly feel like the shot of it was framed as well as it could have been to show the size of the gap.
Scale, yeah.
That's a parkour like trope. Is like it never looks as big as it felt.
Guys, I swear it's way bigger in person than it is on camera.
And I just wish that I talked about Mateo. We talked about this so much during the editing process, because he really scraped the bottom of the barrel for what he had actually captured. But on so many days, you know, again, here I am recruiting a filmmaker to try to put together what I wanted to make a really good parkour video, and it's still falling short in that. Seems like I needed two filmmakers, you know, which is, again, I talk about like indulgence. Like that would have felt weird, you know, going out with like two cameras.
You're
but
outnumbered.
on the final day, or the final challenge, we did have two cameras running. But even just, I feel like I should have had like a GoPro on a ledge or something, just to have a separate angle
for the PC cat.
Yeah, specifically that one. I was going to say, like, I probably won't do it again. I know some other people will, though, and I'm stoked to see that happen. But
it's cool if it's like unlocked.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, you've been looking at that for a decade. I have too. Like, I've been looking. I never really thought, oh, like I should go do this, but I've definitely like thought and considered it and been like, okay, this is a sizable cat leap, and it's so iconic, and it's so it's like right in the middle of downtown. It's like you had a lot of people watching too.
Yeah, sometimes that was what turned me off on certain days, is just there's something to do with standing jumps, particularly if it's like a standing jump takeoff where you it's easier to just like get in your own head. I think sometimes I have an easier time approaching something that has momentum into it, because you can kind of make the
Or like another skill right before it, where you're like linking it together.
Yeah, it's just like with the approach, you have this point where like you're already committed. Like no one goes. Well, it does happen sometimes, but like say you're going for a running pre, kind of like before you even hit the penultimate like stride, you're doing it.
Yeah.
You know, you're committed, because otherwise you'd have to like really put on the brakes. And sometimes that happens, but I feel like it happens earlier in the run up. Like you'll start a run up and then be like, oh no, this is not happening. You know, like the decision not to go happens earlier. But there's something about like staring at something, and for me, it's very visual. Like you can see yourself landing, see yourself jumping. Yeah. And as soon as you see it, you have to like attack right then. And yeah, sometimes like public will get to me.
Yeah.
It's a really public area. It doesn't really come off in the film, as you said, but
yeah, it's very high foot traffic area.
But that's parkour or anything. Sometimes his defeats don't always come off the way that they felt. I do have more interview and footage that I'll be putting out soon that for that particular challenge.
Perfect.
So you'll get a bit more story. But that was the other hard thing too, is like how much of this, because we recorded about like 40 minutes of interview. He asked me a bunch of questions and we have quite a bit. And I knew it wasn't going to be long. There was a point where I wanted there to be a little bit at the start and a little bit in the middle and then go again. And Mateo was against it. And ultimately I just kind of let him do what he wanted there. But yeah, I do think it's unclear where in the footage, like where in the lines, like the injury occurs, unless you kind of know a bit more, or if you're watching really intently. Because I think I've had some people watch it where they think like everything happened like post-injury, and it's like, no, that's not the case. I can tell you there's 4 clips that happened like post-knee injury, which was the other crazy thing, where it's like I could have just been done with the project, and I didn't feel like it would be good enough. I didn't feel like it would be good enough had I not. There were like 2 easier ones, and then the 2, the PC Cat and the Ironworks line, that I just felt like if I didn't try, it would have been, it would have been like, what's the point?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, if you haven't watched it yet, go watch Resilient. It took him 6 years to make. Or, I don't know, 4.5 really? But yeah, go watch. Tell us what you think about Resilient. What do you think about the PC Cat? Do you think I'm right?
Did you even notice it?
Yeah.
Do you even know what we're talking about?
Are we gonna call it there?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's a good spot to end this talk. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are now on a different YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. If I do the right things. So
thanks for tuning in, all 8 of you potentially.
So because we're on a new channel, so please subscribe. It's going to really help us out, because we wanted to move off of the main Origins channel for a variety of reasons. So please subscribe to the new one, like it, comment, share it with your friends if you value discussions like this, and we will catch you in the next one.